Hey, folks. Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. We have some breaking news to start with, just coming across the wire a little while ago. What appears to be an attempted terror attack at the Niagara Falls at the Rainbow Bridge. Now, according to Fox News, I'm going to read this straight from foxnews.com. We don't have many details so far. Here's what we do know. That the FBI is investigating a vehicle explosion today, Wednesday, at the Rainbow Bridge border crossing between the U.S. and Canada in what sources tell Fox News was an attempted terrorist attack. Again, look, we're being very careful here, folks. We don't have all the details yet. This is just coming across the wire. As I come to you around 4:10 p.m. Eastern time here in the United States, here's what we do know. And this is Fox News is reporting on it. I'm just looking down at my phone and reading this to you. Explosives were in the vehicle at the time, and two people who were in the car are dead, the sources told Fox News, and a border officer was injured. The vehicle was driving again from the U.S. to Canada, and they were attempting to drive toward the border officer building, according to the sources, what they told Fox News. All bridges are now closed in that area, and all government buildings are evacuated, according to the sources. The international border crossing points between Canada and Western New York, that Niagara Falls area, are closed after the incident, which also injured at least one person, a 27-year-old man who was taken to Niagara Falls Hospital with minor injuries. The FBI Buffalo field office is investigating a vehicle explosion at the Rainbow Bridge, the FBI said in a statement. So, folks, there you have it. Again, I wish I had more for you, but that's all we have so far. This news just broke about 40 minutes ago, and I'm just trying to piece everything together from various reports coming out about it as I come to you again, just a little after 4 p.m. Eastern time here in the United States. So just to start today, and we're going to dig into Hamas, the ceasefire, Hezbollah, Russia, Iran, and what's happening in that relationship. We're going to dig into that. But just to start today, look, I wanted to share that breaking news with you, just so you know what's going on there north of the border here in the United States, where I'm coming to you from, right along the U.S.-Canada border, I should say, in the Niagara Falls area. I expect that more details will emerge in the hours to come, probably after we leave you here when we wrap the live stream. But according to Fox News, sources are saying this was an attempted terror attack. Again, that's not me saying it. I'm just quoting so far what others close to this case are saying. It's too early to say. We're careful here, and we try to be smart here on the Watchman Newscast, so we don't want to say too much that we frankly don't know about yet. We just don't have the details, but look for more there. And the obvious question, obviously, is, look, over the past few weeks, we've been talking about it here in the newscast. The FBI has been talking about it, that there is a heightened risk of terror attacks on U.S. soil, perhaps carried out by Hamas sympathizers, those who are sympathetic to Hezbollah and the Iranian regime, those who are inspired by Hamas and what happened on October 7th. So if this was indeed an attempted terror attack, it's really no surprise considering the climate we are in right now. And although Hamas has largely been focused in the Middle East theater, obviously in Israel's backyard and targeting Israel, that's the main rationale for Hamas's existence, the destruction of the world's one and only Jewish state. We know that, but folks, two things to remember if there's any shock, and we don't know, again, we don't know if this was a terror attack, who was involved, who they were acting in the name of. We have no idea. Obviously, we've had many ISIS and Al-Qaeda sympathizers here in the U.S. and in Western Europe as well. So again, we just don't know yet. But just a broader statement, just so you know, as we're in this general climate of concern over attempted Hamas attacks or Hamas sympathizer attacks here in the West, as the war rages on in the Middle East, note two things. That number one, Hamas already has American blood on its hands. Now, not even to mention the fact that some of the hostages being held in captivity in Gaza right now by Hamas are, yes, U.S. citizens, but even further than that, dozens of U.S. citizens have been killed in Israel over the years in Hamas terror attacks. And Hamas has made statement after statement, Hamas leaders, about their hatred for the United States, et cetera, and even outright threats against America at times. But another point, important point to my mind, that is very crucial to this conversation that I must mention is this. Folks, remember, and we've mentioned this over the past few weeks, but just a helpful reminder, listen, Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. What do I mean by that? Hamas, in its founding charter, founded in 1987, and that charter was a viciously anti-Semitic screed and anti-Western to boot. But in that charter, Hamas self-identifies itself as the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. People forget sometimes because obviously Hamas is so closely linked to the Iranian regime. But remember, the Hamas movement is an arm, self-described, self-proclaimed arm, the Palestinian branch, in their words, of the Muslim Brotherhood. What is the Muslim Brotherhood? And again, if Hamas is part of the Brotherhood, why you should not be surprised if Hamas were to eventually turn its sights on the West. And we've had plenty of Hamas sympathizers, financiers here in the West, by the way. In the United States, I think an organization based in Texas called the Holy Land Foundation that federal authorities wrapped up years ago. That was a Hamas financing operation right here in the United States. So we've had that. But the question has always been, would Hamas supporters take their support for Hamas into the physical realm, meaning carrying not only financing and ideological support, but carrying out physical attacks on Western soil? We'll see what happened today in Niagara Falls. We just don't know yet. Too early to say. It'd be irresponsible to say anything other than what we've said already. But with the Muslim Brotherhood, remember, folks, a global movement, the granddaddy of them all when it comes to really modern day Islamic terror groups, bar none. Every significant Sunni Islamist terror leader, from Osama bin Laden to Ayman al-Zawahiri, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Omar al-Baghdadi of ISIS, al-Qaeda ISIS leaders, all of them, before they formed those terror movements, they belonged to the Muslim Brotherhood. Why? Because the Muslim Brotherhood has essentially served as the gateway drug to terror. And they were the original modern day terror movement, founded in 1924 in Egypt by a man named Hassan al-Banna. And to give you an idea of the Brotherhood's goals, and to a larger extent, Hamas's goals. Look, any global member or branch of the Brotherhood subscribes to the Brotherhood's belief system. To give you an idea of what that is, here is the Muslim Brotherhood's official motto. And again, I mentioned the Brotherhood's main power base has always been Egypt, but they've been weakened severely there over the past decade by President al-Sisi. He's had a severe crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood movement there, but the Brotherhood, especially here in the West, surprise, surprise, with its ideological supporters and front groups, continues to have great influence. But here is the motto of the Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas, certainly as a branch self-professed of the Brotherhood, would also subscribe to. This is the motto of the Brotherhood. Allah is our objective. The Prophet, they mean Muhammad, Islam's Prophet Muhammad, is our leader. The Quran is our law. Jihad is our way. Dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. So if jihad is your way and dying in the name of Allah is your highest hope, martyrdom, they would say, it should be no surprise that al-Qaeda and ISIS, suicide bombers and terrorists, etc., have done what they have done. If they first passed through the Brotherhood, they were fed with the ideological ammo and motivation through the Muslim Brotherhood movement, and then they moved on to taking it to the logical next step, the violent wing, al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, etc. That's how this thing works, folks. And the ideological incubators for that movement are right here in the West many times. And eventually they graduate, quote unquote, to violent jihad. So keep all of this in mind when we talk about Hamas and Hamas supporters, including right here in the United States. And again, we don't know all the details. We barely know any details, quite frankly, about what happened at the Niagara Falls today. But I'm sure as the hours go on today and after we go off air here on the live stream, we'll learn much more. And I'm sure that eventually we'll talk about it to a greater extent here on the live stream. In the meantime, we are watching, and I know everyone watching us is watching as well. We've got thousands with us. Before the time we are done, we will have thousands more. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Quite a segue there to go from jihad is our way to happy Thanksgiving. But nonetheless, it is Thanksgiving Eve here in the United States, where I'm coming to you from. And Thanksgiving Day is tomorrow. And folks, wow. I mean, what a Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for, the list goes on and on and on. But I have a bit of a heavy heart on this Thanksgiving as I think about what's happening right now in the Middle East and in Israel. And I think about the hostages who, we'll talk about this in a minute, who a chunk of them seem to be about to be released. But I think about what their families have gone through. I think about what everyone in Israel is going through. It's hard for me to say, hey, grab a turkey leg and eat some pie, when I know that in Israel, a nation that's near and dear to my heart, I consider Jerusalem my second home. I have many dear friends right now on the front lines in Israel who've been called up for reserve duty, but they're seeing battle in Gaza, the Gaza border, the Lebanon border. So I'm thinking of them. They have little ones. They have wives at home. And some of them don't know when they're going home next to see their loved ones and their families. So I'm thinking of them this Thanksgiving. I'm thinking of the communities in southern Israel that were ravaged on October 7th by Hamas demonic barbarians and are now emptied. I'm thinking of the communities in northern Israel, which have been forced to evacuate because of the Hezbollah threat on that border. In all, some 300,000 Israelis have been displaced since October 7th. So I'm thinking of them and where they're staying right now, makeshift accommodations, no doubt. So there's a lot to be praying about this Thanksgiving, no doubt. And that's ultimately the main aim of this holiday here in the United States. A day was set apart to give thanks to God. So I'm going to do exactly that, number one. But number two, I'm going to petition the Lord your God, God Almighty, on behalf of Israel and the people suffering in Israel right now. There are many suffering right now, folks. So for me, this Thanksgiving is absolutely twofold, and it should always be that way. We should be giving thanks to God at the same time we are petitioning God. And you might say, what's all this God talk? Well, this is a news channel, but from a Christian perspective, proudly and unapologetically. And we believe prayer works, and we believe God's arm is not too short to work miracles right now in Israel, including with the hostages, which brings us to obviously the story of the day in the Middle East, the story of the past 24 hours. We talked about it yesterday as well, but more details now are being fleshed out that yes, Israel has agreed to this hostage deal with Hamas, a ceasefire that will last at least 4 days, some 50, just to recap if you haven't heard yet, real quick recap, and then we'll advance the story. Some 50 hostages will be released by Hamas. These are from what I can gather, almost exclusively children, little ones, and their mothers. So Israel has insisted that mothers and their children not be separated. So of these 50 hostages, that seems to be the vast majority, little ones and their moms, who will be coming home to their families this Thanksgiving. Apparently 10 a.m. tomorrow, this ceasefire, this temporary ceasefire, again, it's going to last at least for 4 days, will go into effect. Now, I want to get your thoughts on it. We had thoughts yesterday. Most people, from what I could gather, that commented, were not too happy about this. So I want to get your thoughts on it. What do you think? Leave your comments here. We have a very active and lively chat going on right now with a very educated audience. So what do you think of this deal? As I laid it out yesterday, I'm just refreshing your memories today. 50 hostages Israel will get in return for 4 days of a ceasefire in Gaza. And Israel also has to give up a few hundred Hamas prisoners, not hostages. These were Hamas terrorists, sympathizers, etc., who were in prison in Israel for good reason. But now, as part of this deal, Israel will release them. Look, folks, it's a heavy price to pay, no doubt. And another part of it is Israel cannot, apparently, over the next few days, as this ceasefire is in effect, cannot use drone surveillance in northern or southern Gaza. So there are, look, it's on one hand, it's a bitter pill to swallow for many Israelis. But on the other hand, look, these women and children who were held in the bowels of hell in these tunnel dungeons beneath Gaza are now free. They've been for practically 7 weeks now. They're now going to be freed and in the arms of their loved ones once again after unspeakable trauma. Many of these little ones, their parents were slaughtered on October 7th. They're coming home to who? And the IDF reportedly, Israel Defense Forces soldiers, they have been instructed when these little ones emerge, and the Red Cross is apparently going to escort them out of Gaza back into Israel. The IDF has been instructed not to ask the kids any questions. The kids are so traumatized. Their parents may have been slaughtered before their eyes. The IDF is basically going to say, look, we're from the IDF. We're here to help and facilitate the transfer and get them into the arms of whatever loved ones they have left. So considering that the literal hell they were living in Gaza, and considering, look, for me, this has become personal, folks, not only because of my time in Israel and my friends in Israel and some of my best friends in the world, but with the hostages, the families. If you've been watching us here on the Watchman over the past several weeks, hey, we've interviewed no less than, I believe, 8 to 10 families, at least that number, whose loved ones are being held hostage in Gaza right now. Absolutely gut-wrenching to interview these folks. What do you even say? As an interviewer, what do you even ask? Hey, the one father I interviewed, hey, your 10-year-old, your 8-year-old, your 6-year-old, and your wife have been dragged into captivity by Hamas Nazis into Gaza, and they're being held in some dank tunnel right now. How do you feel? I mean, what? In all seriousness, though, I didn't ask that, obviously, but what do you even ask? By the grace of God, I got through the interviews, and they were powerful. And I believe they're the most important interviews I've ever done, because here, more than anyone, I think in the media, quote unquote, certainly we're not a mainstream media outlet, but we've been trying to keep the story alive of the hostages, because many in the world, as you may have noticed, folks, have very short memories. So we've been trying to keep this story alive. So it's hard for me, obviously, not to celebrate their release. I think everyone in Israel, regardless of how they feel about this, is celebrating the release and happy. They're going to be ecstatic that they're escaping. They'll be home with their families. And I think, look, it's going to galvanize Israeli society. And for sure, it's going to be wonderful images of the hostages coming home. That's all the good. And again, I've advocated for their release more than anyone, interviewing the families and literally leading prayer here in the newscast and praying for miraculous hostage rescues. I said, God's arm is not too short. I say all that to say there are issues with this deal. Look, my friend Joel Rosenberg today, writing on All Israel News, I think Joel summed it up pretty well. He's torn and he's living in Israel. Hey, everyone's celebrating and thanking God on this Thanksgiving that the hostages are coming home, at least 50 of them. There's still, almost 200 more. But look, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Israel is giving up a lot. And folks, my concern, and again, I'm usually on this program, and this is one of the reasons you watch me, very black and white. There are no gray areas. This is a tough one. Because I believe we rejoice over the captives are freed. But I do believe the price Israel is paying, wow, look, the IDF had such momentum. And we're, squeezing Hamas. Hamas's backs have been against the wall. The Israel Defense Forces have been well on their way to accomplishing that stated goal of crushing Hamas decisively, destroying this demonic death cult. Now there's a 4-day lull. What happens a lot can happen in 4 days. What does Hamas do? Does Hamas regroup? Does it And now it's getting fuel shipments. Does that help it to fuel its war machine further? Does it help Hamas get back on its feet? Do Hamas leaders find a way to flee Gaza and leave the scene and escape, essentially? So many variables here to consider. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's political and military leadership have both declared, look, as soon as this temporary ceasefire, and it's a temporary ceasefire, as soon as it's up, we're going back in and we're finishing the job. Amen. And I know the people of Israel will hold them to that. But this is a tough, tough issue, folks. I mean, anyone who says it's not, that it's completely cut and dry, you have a 8-month-old baby being held in captivity, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds being held in Hamas captivity. So you can see the desire on the part of Israel's leaders to get them home. My prayer is that the momentum that the IDF has built is not affected by this, and that Israel finishes the job, the very necessary job of destroying Hamas so that it can never threaten the nation of Israel ever again. So that has to be the prayer here. I'm concerned also that Hamas is going to try to play out the string here. What do I mean by that? There have been reports that after these initial 50 hostages will be released tomorrow, that Hamas is saying, hey, well, maybe we'll release another 10, and that means another pause in fighting, maybe another day. And Hamas, what they're trying to do, they will try to do at least, is stretch this out. They're going to dangle more hostages in front of Israel and say, hey, we'll release 10 more if you pause for another day or another few days. And if you release maybe 400 Palestinian prisoners this time from Israeli prisons. Folks, do you see where I'm going with this? Hamas's asking price could get higher and higher as the days go on. And the longer the ceasefire stretches, say it goes beyond 4 days, we're looking at 7, 8 days. The longer that happens, not only does Hamas, number one, have time to regroup, perhaps escape. Number two, it has time to build international support for, hey, you know what? We've had no fighting for 7 days. It's been quiet. Come on, Israel. Enough's enough. You've made your point. That's what the so-called international community is already saying. And number three, does this give time for Hamas and an opportunity for Hamas to recast itself as reasonable? Hey, look, we released all the women and the children, and we're willing to release hostages. See, we're not so bad. Now, these are modern day Nazis, a demonic death cult. But the world, much of it at least, or at least, I don't know about much of it, but significant segments of it, don't seem to believe that. That's why we've had pro-Hamas marches right here in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere around the world. So, wow. Would that be the simplistic way of saying this is a massive, massive turning point, perhaps, in this war, folks? So watch very closely over the next few days, which brings me to Hezbollah, which is actually the title of this newscast. So eventually we're getting around. Hezbollah has apparently put out there that they also want to observe this ceasefire. Now, there were no official negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah that we know of. Hezbollah was not at the negotiating table. Apparently, Qatar was throughout, and they've played. Don't be fooled by the ceasefire, folks. Qatar has played a nefarious role for years when it comes to Hamas. A Hamas support network there, essentially. But Hezbollah that we know of has not been part of these negotiations. And I posed the question yesterday here on the live stream. And by the way, if you miss any of our newscasts, you can find them all right here in our archives on the homepage under newscast. And while you're there, if you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We would love to have you here every day as watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this. So be sure to subscribe. When you do, YouTube will recommend this video to more people, which means that doesn't glorify us. It means the message of truth gets out to a broader audience And in times of major deceit and fake news and untruth that we're living in right now, man, oh man, the more we can get a message of biblical truth out there, the better. So we'd love if you could join us as a subscriber. But I posed the question yesterday that, okay, the Gaza front may be quiet, and we'll see. Is Hamas going to honor this truce over the next few days? We shall see. But I mentioned yesterday, that doesn't mean just because Gaza is potentially quiet, that does not mean that the northern front in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and the deep southern front in Yemen, the Houthis, will be quiet. So it was significant that Hezbollah put it out there again this morning that they also would, quote, honor the ceasefire. We shall see. And the Houthis in Yemen as well. They're making noise that they fired a projectile at the southern Israeli city of Eilat earlier today. So that, to me, is perhaps other than what's Hamas going to do, the second biggest question. In the next few days, is there total quiet in the region? Meaning nothing happens up north with Hezbollah, nothing happens to the far south, about 1,000 miles south of Israel in Yemen, with the Iran-backed Houthi rebels? That's the big question. And look, folks, further down the line, and if you watch this program on a regular basis, you know what we believe, that there is a great northern war eventually coming, where Israel eventually will be forced to go toe-to-toe and face off with Hezbollah and the Iranian regime in Lebanon and Syria. I call it the Great Northern War, and Israel, perhaps sooner rather than later, is going to have to deal with the threat to the north, just as it's dealing with the threat to the south right now, because it is unsustainable to have a powerful terrorist army in the form of Hezbollah, Iran's most lethal proxy, perched on your northern border with some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. It's unsustainable. Not only that, I mentioned those displaced Israelis that were praying for this Thanksgiving. Hey, look, if you are living, and I've asked this every day, and I think I'll know the answer, and I'm sure everyone will comment here on the chat. And Melissa Resnick, one of our loyal viewers, just said, this is only the beginning of the war. I just read her comment. Melissa's so true. I agree with you. This is only the beginning. But if you live in northern Israel, are you okay? Israel defeats Hamas, crushes them, God willing, and the dust settles to a degree in Gaza. But you turn around, and Hezbollah is still active and essentially at full strength on Israel's northern border. Now, Hezbollah has taken pretty heavy losses, close to 100 fighters reportedly, in these exchanges with Israel over the past few weeks. And if Gaza wasn't happening right now, Israel would have already completely bombarded Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. The only reason Israel hasn't is because it's trying to avoid fighting on multiple fronts, fighting Iran's entire ring of fire that surrounds Israel on all sides. But if you're an Israeli who lives in a town like Metula, these beautiful communities in the north that I've spent a great deal of time in, and Hezbollah, when the dust settles in Gaza, is still at full strength essentially in the north and perched on your border with intentions to carry out more October 7th style attacks, only in the north and perhaps at an even greater magnitude than what Hamas did, because folks, remember, Hezbollah is a much more lethal fighting force than Hamas, and you saw the damage Hamas did on October 7th. So if you live in the north of Israel, would you go back in that climate with Hezbollah still there? I don't think so. I think that's a tough sell for the communities of northern Israel to return when Hezbollah barbarians are staring at you across the border in the aftermath of October 7th. Everything changed on October 7th, folks. The region, Israel, the world changed on October 7th. Deterrence was proven to, I don't know if it ever worked. It certainly no longer works. It didn't work with Hamas. Israel's leadership, political and military leadership, seemed to believe that Hamas was firmly deterred. Now, when the dust settles a bit, there will be hearings, and they will give an account of their handling in the run-up, their handling of Hamas in the run-up to October 7th. But can anyone right now in the aftermath of October 7th, anyone in Israel really say hey, you can return to your homes in northern Israel. Hezbollah is deterred. Would anyone after October 7th really take that seriously? They'll say, wait a minute, you said that Hamas was deterred, and Hezbollah is much more powerful than Hamas. So that threat's going to have to be dealt with to the north. I don't know when, but let me tell you, folks, that great northern war is coming. It truly is beginning stages here. It's early. I talked about this with Pastor Jack Hibbs on the channel the other day. It's early. And my hope and prayer was that Israel, and perhaps they will in Gaza, that Israel could land some knockout blows that shortened the campaign in Gaza. And one of the reasons for that is because Israel has, I believe, a much greater problem to the north, once again. But in the meantime, when we talk about this ring of fire and Iran, I remind you that the Iranian regime is the head of the snake. Folks, listen to me very clearly. Hezbollah would not exist, and Hamas would not have perpetrated the October 7th massacre without the Iranian regime. And that's a statement of fact. They are the fount of terror in the region. And look, the Houthis in Yemen, who I mentioned, would not be firing rockets, missiles, and drones and hijacking a cargo ship in the Red Sea without active Iranian support. There is a theme that runs through Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Iraq. In addition to human misery that's been brought upon all five of those areas, it's the Iranian regime as the main perpetrator of that misery and using these nations as client states. And I pose this question to these Hamas supporters that we've got some trolls here in the chat from time to time. How does it feel to essentially just be a puppet for the Iranian regime? If you're Hamas, at the end of the day, you are cannon fodder for the mullahs in Tehran. That's how they view you. You're a means to an end for them. The Iranian regime is not getting its own hands dirty. They're not using Iranian soldiers by and large. Mainly, they're waging their war against Israel and the United States through proxy. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and those Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. So, wow, you are cannon fodder for a Shia regime in Tehran. That's what it boils down to. But that same regime right now, a closing thought here that I think one of our most important thoughts we've shared today, the Iran-Russia relationship, some movement there, folks, and not in a good way. Number one, the U.S. is concerned that Iran, and look, I'm not an I told you so guy, but I will just confirm that we've reported this for months, that Iran is considering supplying Russia, not only with those attack drones, but with short-range ballistic missiles. So this is not a shock to our viewers. And look, if you've been following this at all, you know that Vladimir Putin's regime has gone to Iran, has gone to North Korea to replenish their weapons stockpiles. And Iran and Russia now have a very, very close military defense alliance. They are firm allies. So Iran considering supplying ballistic missiles to Russia, and the Wagner Group, remember them? That mercenary group in Russia that has been very close to Vladimir Putin, led a failed rebellion back in June. Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, was marching to Moscow, then abruptly turned back. He was killed in August in a plane crash under suspicious circumstances, needless to say. But the Wagner Group, are they back in the Russian regime's good graces? Unclear 100%, but what we do know, and these are persistent reports over the past few weeks, that the Wagner Group is considering arming Iran and Hezbollah with, in particular, air defense systems. Folks, I've said all along, the Russia-Iran relationship is a quid pro quo. Yes, Iran has supplied Russia with those attack drones, but they haven't done it out of the goodness of their hearts. They want a few things. They want weapons in return. Air defense systems, that'll do. But also, I think the main ask for the Iranian regime may very well end up being, and this is a prophetic precursor, I believe, folks, to the war of Ezekiel, the war of Gog and Magog, laid out in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. I think a day is coming when Iran's going to say to Russia, if they haven't been already, hey, we are your ally, yet you are allowing the Zionist entity to continue to pound us here in Syria under your noses. Remember, thousands of Russian troops are still in Syria at Israel's doorstep. And Russia, every time its allies are thumped by Israel, whether it's the Assad regime, the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, to a degree, does that leave egg on Russia's face in Syria? Will Iran play to that and say, look, you need to establish, say, a no-fly zone here in Syria? And that would be a very nice and welcome repayment for our helping you with your war in Ukraine. I think it's all on the table, folks. You live in prophetic times. You live in Bible times, in case you did not know. Quick note here. We will not have a new live stream tomorrow. On Thanksgiving Day, we're taking the day off with our families. But Friday, I encourage you to tune in. Programming note, we are posting here, I believe, 1 p.m. Eastern time, a fascinating new Watchman show where we dig into Psalm 83 and that war of Gog and Magog and where we are at with our good friend, Rabbi Jason Sobel. Now, you might have seen our show a few weeks ago. Jason and I had over 1 million views here on the channel, digging into Bible prophecy and what this Israel-Hamas war means in a larger prophetic sense. So be sure to tune in here on Friday to check that out. It's going to be posted at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And if you are a subscriber, you'll get the notification. I don't even need to tell you. You'll get the notification, so be sure to subscribe as well. Hey, folks, keep the situation in Israel in your prayers. It's a difficult situation, no doubt, with the hostage. We rejoice that the hostages are coming home, but we just pray that this does not jeopardize Israel. On the other hand, when it comes to security, God's in control. He's on the throne. Keep it all in prayer. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And until Friday, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.